Here we go.
Wow, thank you, and welcome again to our Zoomies and everyone here. Thank you for being here and for your patience. And especially to our A team, Michael, Leonore, and Jerry, for stepping in with technological wizardry. So, as I said, we're on a journey. We started with imagine another world. And then we moved to hard times come again no more, which Michael sang as we lit the candles. And then we heard from the prophet Jeremiah, which is, again, wailing and gnashing of teeth and the suffering of the people. So we're living with these colliding images this morning, right? And then here we have the parable of the dishonest manager. I don't know, how many of you have heard that parable before? It's called the dishonest manager. It's kind of a general, okay. Supposedly the manager who is serving the owner has a fire sale and slashes the prices for the clients and kind of saves his skin. So we'll get to that and we'll unpack that in a moment. But I entitled today, The Gifts of Sabbath Economics. Thanks to Deborah, I was going to name it something else. Sabbath economics is not sexy. What does that mean? It means we don't like to talk about it, and we don't really, it's not very interesting. We live in an economic paradigm and an economic system of capitalism, which is really causing a lot of suffering for people. And I don't need to tell you that more and more. The profit is going this way, and the trickling down is never making it to the bottom. So hard times come again no more is very real for a lot of people alongside the violence of our political times in this political regime. But I want to talk about Sabbath economics. We all know what Sabbath is, right? A day to unplug, a day to cease our labor. What would you think Sabbath economics is about? Any ideas? Anyone? When I shout out what, and I'll say it up here so everybody can hear. What does it mean, Sabbath economics? Giving.
Taking a break from money.
Taking a break from money, yeah. Any other ideas? Examining your closeness to God.
Working towards peace.
Working towards peace. So we have a broad understanding of what Sabbath economics means, which in the Jewish Testament or the Torah is God's blueprint. Sabbath economics is actually God's blueprint for how economic systems should look. And as you'll find out, it's not at all what we're living within, right? We don't live in God's Sabbath economy or God's Sabbath economics. So Sabbath economics in a nutshell is about abundance versus scarcity. Can anybody relate to that? The grace of limits, not endless acquisition and endless exploitation and endless more. It's what Jerry said in his prayer poem, enough. And I love that image of, there's a lot of wonderful images in there, but the weightlessness of trust, relationship. These are core ideas of what Sabbath economics means. Reciprocity, mutualism. And so sharing is definitely what you said, Deborah. So I wrote a book called Soul Tending, getting to the heart of Sabbath, of the Sabbath. And my last chapter is called Reimagining Work. And what I wanted to do in there is help us reimagine what work in the world is supposed to be about. Not just for more profit, more consumerism, more, but what does it mean to reimagine and think about what our true work is? And I actually used a lot from the playbook of Walter Brueggemann, who is the late Old Testament scholar, biblical scholar, who talked about Sabbath as resistance, saying no to the culture of now. So Sabbath, unplugging from the economy, is actually resistance, subversive. We don't think about it as that. It's the least kept commandment, Sabbath. Most of us are going to go home, throw a load of laundry in, or, go shopping or whatever, instead of just staying unplugged. But he recounts the story, of course, of the Hebrew people who were in slavery for 400 years, right? That was the story in Pharaoh's empire. And so they were there serving the empire, the endless exploitation, making bricks under the whip of the overseer. So their blood, sweat, and tears and the brutal experience they had went on for a long time. But yet they were kind of okay with it because they had their hovels they could live in. They had a place to raise their kids. They had a place to hang their hat. And by the way, they had something called the flesh pots of Egypt. Have you ever heard of that? It's like they literally got a ration of meat. And so they kind of liked knowing where their food was coming from. Well, the God of the desert, the Yahweh, who was a little more feral and undomesticated, said, no. You guys have gotten way too colonized by that system of acquisition and exploitation and serving mammon. Really, mammon is greed. That's one way of interpreting it. We're taking you out into the desert, and so the story goes they went out into the desert for how many years? 40 years. And guess where their food came from? The sky. Manna fell down. Manna literally means what is it? They didn't know what it was, but it came every day, and if they tried to store it away, it melted. And what else did they get? Quails. Quails came. So they were fed every day, and they had to begin to decolonize their mind and trust a bigger imagination. Speak about imagination. An imagination that was bigger than the economy they had just left, which was pretty small and pretty brutal and pretty hard for them. And so their delusion of where their sense of security came was shattered. Seems that we in this country now are facing the very same thing. A system that is attacking those who serve it. And it's all under the delusion of more economic power, more capitalistic wealth for everybody, an empire. And they're trying to sell us the idea that the illusion that everybody's boats will rise. How many of you believe that anymore? Everybody's boats will rise. But the divine playbook of Sabbath economics involves unplugging from that ceaseless monster, stop feeding the monster, and stop feeding that economic system of fear-based scarcity, competition, and violence that erupts from the imperial extraction. Some of you might remember J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote the Hobbit series, The Lord of the Rings, and all of those. And Kenneth just recently told me that was based on Plato's Republic of the Golden Ring. Is that what you said? Just the ring. Just the golden ring. Plato's Republic talks about the golden ring. So when you put the golden ring on, what happens? You become invisible. And so you can carry out your greed and all kinds of acts of violence in the darkness. Think the swampy creature Gollum, the Dark Lord Sauron. But I also want you to think of the courageous acts of Frodo and Samwise, who needed to break the power of that system. Tolkien knew what it means to live under that kind of oppression and the lies and the deceit and the delusion that comes as he lived through the fascism rising in Europe and the demonic war and Holocaust. Recently, I heard interview with Maria Ressa, who is a journalist who was over in the Philippines under the dictator Duterte. And she said, today, 72% of countries live under authoritarian rule. That's what she just said. I heard that in an interview. So we are living in a time where authoritarianism is rising, and humans have lost their way, and some people are wearing the golden ring. So, I want to talk about those who have taken the courage, like Samwise and Frodo, ordinary people, working schmucks, like most of us have been, who know that the true measure of our riches and security is not in the system, but in community and in relationship. Right relationship, reparation, helping people unload crushing debt, enoughness, and liberation and freedom in our minds and hearts and bodies, that we are no longer colonized by that system, economic system I'm talking about. Thus we get to our parable. That interesting little parable, okay? So I took most of my notes from this tome. I don't think you want to read it like for bedtime reading or anything. Ched Myers is a biblical scholar who's done a lot on Sabbath economics, and he wrote this dense book called Healing Affluenza and Resisting Plutocracy, okay? The Gospel of Luke's Jesus and Sabbath economics. So, what he's talking about, he says you can call this a dishonest manager, okay? That's what this parable has usually been entitled. But he said, I prefer to call it the defective manager, meaning that this manager defects from the owning class to the working class and the people who are being dispossessed and disenfranchised. So what he does by saying, the owner's going to can me, death by begging or death by digging, which is really what was going to happen in those times with someone who was a middleman. He said, I'm going to do something that's kind of subversive and probably, I guess, resistive. I don't know if I'm going to survive. I might get canned anyway, but I'm going to go and slash the accounts like a big fire sale for all the people, the clients of the owner. Wow. He had the power to do that. And just so you know the context of this time, so first century Palestine, when Jesus was walking around, was under Roman occupation. And Rome had pretty much eroded or destroyed what had been, by and large, a relational ethos of trust, of relationships, and how people dealt in their business dwellings and in their daily lives. And so it had become a patron-client economy. Does anybody know what that might mean? It means the wealth is going this way. There were more owners who were dispossessing people of land, and then those people had to work for them to pay off their debt, and it became this horrible time of people getting poorer and poorer while the patrons became wealthier. So this guy was stuck in between. And for modern managerial, this is what Myers says, for modern managerial class folk, this story scenario might be analogized to that of a mid-level supervisor in a large corporation, or in a large-scale federal bureaucracy, okay? They are just about to be downsized because of below expected sales numbers. They venture an act of resistance, hoping they will ingratiate themselves to clients who will in turn offer them hospitality. So that he's defecting from the master system to the relational economy of the people who are indebted to the master. Interesting, huh? And he's considered dishonest. Actually, the master congratulates him for being shrewd and says, because, guess what would happen if the master came back and said, oh no, you can't do that? He would probably lose face and maybe lose a lot of clients. And so he goes with it and he takes, a portion of what the manager is able to raise. This is interesting because it's reorienting an ethic of harsh exploitation by the elite to a relational economy. So the dishonest or the defective manager is flipping the paradigm, right? Okay? beginning to ingratiate himself to the people he really probably belongs with, and somehow suddenly becoming, realizing I'm part of you, actually. And this is interesting in chapter 16, verse 6. The manager says, 100 jugs of olive oil, take your bill down and make it 50. 100 jugs of olive oil in that time would have been 900 gallons of olive oil. So this is early Palestine, it's a very land-based economy. 900 gallons is not just one individual, that's a whole village that's indebted to the master. So you see where I'm going? We're talking about owners who are dispossessing, disenfranchising, and exploiting not just individuals, but whole villages, communities, groups of people. Sound familiar? Okay. The interesting thing is the master and also Jesus says, you have acted shrewdly. Good for you. The children of this age are not as shrewd. The children of this age are more shrewd than the children of light. You all are light workers, okay? And Jesus is saying, you can use this system and right it. Use this system and find ways to subvert it, like the manager said. Make friends for yourself by means of mammon. This is what this little parable can tell you, how you can use the economy and subvert it for relational and Sabbath economics. Verse 10 says, whoever is faithful in very little is faithful also in much. Whoever is dishonest in a little is dishonest in much. We think, wow, is that something to be upheld? But I think of that verse that says, whoever has sinned much will be forgiven much. Like, sin boldly, resist boldly. Even if you mess up, go boldly and try to resist, try to subvert. God honors boldness. Just a story from the hood about someone who has subverted the system. Some of you might have heard of Father Gregory Boyle. He's a Jesuit priest in inner city Los Angeles. And he wrote a lot of books, but Tattoos on the Heart is full of stories about the gang members he serves, men and women who are trying to get out of the gangs in LA, and it's just rife with gangs. And so he created this alternative economy, or an economy that works in our economy, a bakery, a silk screening t-shirt business. And he uses that economy for his gang members who are trying to get out of, the system. But what happened is he realized that there was still a lot of recidivism, is that how you say it? Young members returning to prison, even though they had jobs, even though they had, potential. People who are getting them out of prison and supporting them, because he also has a parish he serves that is very supportive, Dolores Street Catholic Church. And what he said was, what he found over time is that it's the relational economy, the Sabbath economy we're talking about, of what he calls to cherish another person, that actually keeps them from going back to prison. He said the most powerful medicine for recovery is reassurance, affirmation, affection, and hugging. Now, you're not going to get that in the mainstream economy, are you? He tells a wonderful story of Looney, a 15-year-old gangbanger who was in the camp for a while. He got out on probation finally, and they had a big pizza party for him. And so he was back in the hood, and was he going to be able to fly right? We don't know. But he comes up to Father Boyle and he says, hey, I got a report card in the camp, in the prison system. And so Father Boyle fumbles around, opens it up, and he says, I got straight A's. Straight A's, serious, I say. Mia, Rayo, He says straight A's. 2 C's, I look at it, it says 2 C's, 2 B's, and 1 A. And I think, close enough. Not the straightest A's I've ever seen, but I decide not to tell Looney he's an unreliable reporter. Wow, mijo, I tell him, bien hecho, nice going. I fold it and give it back to him. And then he says, on everything I love, mijo, if you were my son, I'd be the proudest man alive. And all of a sudden, Looney is trying to stem the flow of the tears. Like a kid with the fingers in the dike, he's shaking, desperate not to cry. And I look at him and I realize that he's been returned to the ghetto. His grandmother's a good woman. She's the one raising him. But all the other adults around him are dysfunctional. So I lead with my gut and I say, I bet you're afraid you're out, aren't you, Looney? And this seems to play on Looney's emotions. He folds his arms on the front of my desk, rests his sobbing head on his folded arms, and starts to weep. And I reach across the desk and place my hand on his shoulder, and I say, you're gonna be okay. That is the economy that all of us ordinary folks are moving towards and trying to create within the belly of the economy that we know is exploiting and destroying people. Myers ends by saying, the manager has decided to defect from the patron's world in which social relations are cannibalized in service of accumulating wealth for the elite. Having been kicked out of the great household, the manager must bet on the older tradition of a love economy for survival. This parable is an extraordinary call to discipleship in our real world. He said, it is clear that our efforts do not constitute an acceptance of what Dorothy Day called the filthy, rotten system. We have all been thoroughly socialized into the world of mammon, where capital routinely destroys community. But this tale can help us deconstruct and reconstruct our consciousness around money. We are deeply entertained in capitalist culture. And for the foreseeable future, we are stuck with the money economy. But we can use our resources subversively, is what Myers says. We must be clear that money can be used to either negate or affirm social relationships. And as middle-class Christians, we must begin to imagine new ways to use capital consciously. And then he goes on to name, fair trade, community-supported agriculture, social investment, all the things that this community tries to find ways to do. So may we, at the very last verse in this parable says, no slave can serve 2 masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. In a way, it's like choose who you will serve. Choose your attachments. May we resist boldly and subversively find ways to build bridges from the greedy economy of mammon to the humble economy of relational economics, of Sabbath economics, of the love economy. Let's do it, folks.
And now we'll take 2 minutes to ponder what we've heard, and then Michael will bring us out.